you could start, but I would like to see insights from all of you. The question is by Niels Balgalis, don't you think we need to educate general public about Rail Baltica and future opportunities to get outside the walls, so to speak? I think it's a very topical issue in light of the CBA that was just presented.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Niels for this question, and I should give him my particular gratitude for having led a team that very successfully determined where the Latvian railway would run and was probably best in class, it seems, in terms of public consultation in the region to determine where Rail Baltica will actually be built. There's no question that we need to engage more with the general public. This is a beginning. We will be doing in the next year to two more studies on the business case, commercialization opportunities, etc. And I think in this context there will be much more interaction with different commercial entities, be they chambers of commerce, logistics associations, or others. And on the other hand, I hope that we will have, but probably more likely in the next year, more capacity to talk to the budding entrepreneurs and the budding startup and innovation community in the Baltic to strengthen and seek opportunities for the railway.
Thank you, Baiba. Continuing. Nauris, what is your view? Has the project reached its point of no return?
Well, there are important investment decisions already made, yes, and I think that with the support of CBA and project's ability to reach its assumptions, both in terms of cost and revenue and income and wider benefits, I see no reason why this project shall not be continued.
Anyone else wants to comment?
There's always an opportunity to stop a project such as this one. I have no doubt that this is possible, but I believe, and I repeat, you guys are witness to this. We have passed the point of no return. The only question is there enough resolve? Is there capability to be able to realize the project in a way that it is efficient and economic, and that we can all afford it? And that means that everybody involved needs to perform beyond normal expectations in the short to midterm.
And Professor Kinay, I mean, you have been involved in many CBAs for different types of public infrastructure. So what is your view? What constitutes those critical milestones after which the projects have returned?
Oh, I don't know exactly where you are in the case of Rail Baltica. It seems to me that you are well engaged. There is probably no return. I will take a comparison with the scheme I presented you with the automatic metro Grand Paris. The scheme has been approved. All lines have been given date of implementation. Of course, the lastest one will perhaps not be made exactly at the time it's forecasted, but we are sure we make all our plan and all the plan which are made by public authorities includes this project. And I think this is the important point. And I come back to the first question, need to educate general public. I think it's necessary. It would be very useful. No, of course, the general public, but the public of economic actors, firms, workers, associations, and so on. Because in the economic consequence will imply not only all firms, consumers, citizens, and also external actors, foreign actors.
Thank you. Tobias, a question to you, and others are also welcome to interject. what is the estimated level of Finnish cargo on Rail Baltica? It was, of course, mentioned also in the presentation, but since you were an integral part of building the traffic model, maybe you can comment in greater detail.
Yeah, so first of all, we looked at the cargo which is in general feasible for a railway. So we didn't look at really ores or bulk cargo and liquid bulk cargo. So we looked at containerized cargo, we looked at specific consumer products, we looked at paper products, of course, when we talk about Finland. And looked at the trade flows, especially to the Baltics, but very much to Central Europe, meaning to Germany. We looked to Belgium, to the Netherlands, to Austria, and try to identify what is really the most likely way how people would switch cargo from existing modes to the Rail Baltica. So I don't know the exactly share, but I think it's about 8% of cargo flows coming from this section of product types are more or less more likely to be transported on the Rail Baltica.
Norris, anything to add to this?
Well, our analysis showed that there is a great potential for Finnish cargo, and well, one may criticize and say that there is a well-developed storage shipping and ferry routes that are connecting Finland to the northern Germany to Benelux countries. But of course, these are not the only directions where and countries that Finland is trading with. And if we look more to the southeast of the Europe, to the Czech, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Balkans, down to Turkey, then definitely Rail Baltica will be a feasible option to carry goods from Finland. And since logistics industry is let's say quite highly flexible, and then there is nothing is really written in the stone, so we cannot say that there will be no goods moving, let's say, between Berlin and or even Hamburg, as from Finland to Germany using train. But of course, the main competition, Rail Baltica will create competition to road much more than to maritime transport.
Thanks. Also a question from Slido. Why doesn't the current CBA include also Poland and Finland?
Well, let me perhaps answer that one. First of all, the CBA, the cost-benefit analysis, is necessary for the infrastructure and the economic case that we are responsible for in the three Baltic countries. But just as Naude showed at the beginning that the CBA is also for the totality of the line, as you can hear from the passenger and freight flow estimates, whether it's from Finland or Poland, even the CBA for the three Baltic states cannot be seen apart from these two very significant players in our region. So all of this gets integrated in the long run. We are looking forward to the feasibility study that Poland is doing for the sort of last part to see how actually to do it between Elk and the Lithuanian-Polish border and make sure that we have the right route and the right connections and that we actually connect at the right time. And we trust that both countries will in time also consider becoming our shareholders.
Okay, one more question for the moment from Slido, and then I would encourage you to ask questions from the audience. Mr. Andris Laucinš is asking whether the agglomeration effect presented by Professor Kinney can be applied to the Baltics in the sense that Riga may grow and expand at the expense of other cities in the region.
I have not been clear enough, I think. It's not grow at the expense of, but grow more than. And because an increase in accessibility, in the case of two cities, both benefit. But in general, Of course, if one is very small and very close, it will be captured by the big one and become city sleeping cities. But generally speaking, both benefit. But usually, it appears that the biggest one, the larger one, benefits more.
But may I add, I think it is worth to think beyond this one simple one, and now we will build the railway and therefore Riga will grow. We've heard very interesting, in the course of creating the CBA, very interesting observations about the potential change patterns between Tallinn and Pärnu, when it's 40 minutes or 45 minutes commute by train, comfortable commute by train. Maybe there are citizens and businesses that are more interested in moving and living in Pärnu, and there could be a different kind of economic development there than, for example, in Tallinn. Last night, a colleague you will hear later was talking about the very interesting economic developments between Paris and Lyon once the TGV was built. Similarly, there's no question that Kaunas may grow in a very specific way connected to the freight intermodality expected there. So I don't think it's a one-way question about in terms of the growth of quote-unquote only Riga. This will not happen.
May I add also a point which I have not developed enough perhaps, but in the case of several cities, the issue is much more complex, and the recourse to models, to large models, become interesting because it can take into consideration the very complex interaction of a change of accessibility between not two cities but a lot of neighbor cities.
Thank you. So let's take a couple of questions from the audience, and please identify yourself and also the institution that you represent. There. Please.
Sorry, you should get the microphone because we need translation for some.
Thank you. My name is Priit Humal from Citizen Movement, openly about Rail Baltic. First question to Mrs. Paipa-Rubesa. We have heard that Mr. Klavas made points that also publicly have been accessed, that as high risks of Rail Baltica, that financing continuity after 2021 is a high risk. Have you considered the precise scenario that happening if this risk becoming true? That is then how project will continue if the EU support will be discontinued after 2021? And the second question to Mr. Klavas, have you considered also the risk of technological improvements that self-driving cars and without fossil fuel driving self-driving cars will take big part of the road transport? How this risk influence freight of the railway? Thank you.
Thank you for these highly topical questions. So, Baiba, the
First question about post-2021 financing. I don't think anybody really knows today what the financing picture in the European Union will look like in a post-Brexit environment and post-21. That's number one. For the project to continue gaining the 85% support, I will claim that we really have to, in the totality of the Rail Baltica implementing family, step up and be able to deliver project maturity with the monies that have already been granted and show a very clear way forward about how we are going to be working on the project once it is constructed. Thus, the issues around infrastructure management and many others are important to prove so that we can actually have the, I think, foundation for receiving that kind of level of financing. On the other hand, in the course of this year, I don't have a management board at this point appointed. Once we have a CFO properly in place, which maybe fairly shortly. One of the most immediate tasks is actually to look at different financing scenarios. There are other ways to finance a project such as this one. The real issue is what can each of the Baltic countries afford? And I would certainly not presume to claim that, as Nauris, I think earlier said, if it's a 6 billion euro project, that each of the countries should be paying their fair share of the totality of it, because then we know there will be not enough money for education, for health, for defense, for lots of other needs that each country has. So long story short, I think that it is possible to ensure that we have sustainable financing over a very long period of time. I believe that we can perform in such a way that we would at least be looked upon as valuable enough as one of these strategic projects to be able to demand or request, or very, very honorably request, the 85% financing investment level from the European Union. But I think we have to look at alternatives to be prepared should we need to use the alternatives.
Thank you. And Nauri, the second question on self-driving cars and technological advance.
Well, while conducting our analysis, we actually reviewed a number of technology trends that may impact both positively and negatively potential for the Rail Baltica. And of course, self-driving cars and disruptive changes in trucking industry is only one of these. Yes, we also see tendencies of overall digitalization, of 3D printing and others. Well, this has been considered while constructing scenarios, and there are several scenarios that are with let's say set of factors that potentially have a negative impact on Rail Baltica, and also positive scenario where there is more factors that actually do have a positive impact, will have a positive impact on the project. All in all, I must say that our forecasts are based on two very fundamental assumptions. One is that there is continuous economic growth. Yes. And second, that the EU policy of shifting from road to rail will be effective and efficient. Yes. If one of these things doesn't happen, then, or both, or in the doomsday scenario, both of them do not happen, then of course we are in the situation that is even beyond the low case scenario. So, main assumptions: there will be continuous economic growth, and cargo will shift, freight will shift from trucks to rail.
Thank you. Another question from the floor? I can see a hand over there.
Hello, my name is Gins Turlais. I'm from Smart Continent, also a consulting company. I wanted to ask about the initial pricing ideas for the tickets, for example. Maybe it's a good idea to compete more on price basis with bus, because and also cars, because I think many people will choose the twice cheaper option to go by bus still. Well, airplanes are also very cheap nowadays.
Okay, thank you. I think, Nauris, we've discussed this plenty of times. Then, Nauris and Baiba, could you comment?
Yes. First of all, to be methodologically correct, we have not estimated the ticket price of the. We have not estimated ticket price, yes, because the exact pricing strategies will, of course, be dependent on the policies and strategies of the future passenger carriers. What we have calculated is what average income from passenger shall be generated for freight, for passenger carrier to be self-sustainable and be profitable, and then we have benchmarked this with the existing price levels of other EU intracity trains and also within Baltics. Well, when we look at the segments of leisure travelers and business travelers, I would somewhat agree to the leisure travelers, yes, that they, of course, they somewhat tend to value their time less and may be inclined to use cheaper means of transportation. However, when it comes to the business segments, and we already now in Baltics, we can see that, let's say, express trains between Kaunas and Vilnius, they manage to charge higher rates than trains that are not express, yes, and the same goes for Tallinn-Pärnu. So definitely time has a value, yes. How much is this value, and what is the elasticity of ticket price versus time value of particular passenger segment? I believe this is to be determined by the future studies.
Baiba?
You know, the first train will leave, hopefully, Tallinn station somewhere around 2026. Or let's take it a 10-year period from today. None of us know what the tickets will cost 10 years from now. We also don't really know what we will prefer in terms of transportation today. If we look back 10, 15, 20 years, those of you that are old enough to be able to look that far back, you will know that we make different transportation choices over time depending on availability, sort of a cost-benefit ratio for that specific movement in any given place. So I think you're it's very correct to say, well, would you be assuming that some people would prefer the bus or the train or the airplane, or who knows what modes of transportation may be there by then. I love the cars with the helicopters, you know, we never know. Pricing we'll talk about a few years from now.
Just a small remark from my side. We all know that Baltics are so-called automotive nations, yes. And I remember my father having his first car in early 90s. You know, it was much more important to him, I thought, at a certain moment than his family, yes. Well, now when I recruit young people, yes, and I talk to them, what are their material world ambitions, yes. So would you want to make enough to have a new car and so on? Say, car? Why do I need a car? Yes. I can use Uber, I can use Taxify. So there is this shift, of course, from more automotive nations, and it will continue in future from nations that are more inclined to use public transportation. And this shall be, of course, the Rail Baltica project will benefit from it.
Well, here's a question that we hear very often, and in particular, I would like to hear Professor Kinei's view on this. The question is, let's have more fun. Why not Baltica Hyperloop?
Hyperloop.
Why not build a Hyperloop instead of a Rail Baltica?
Why not?
But in your empirical analysis...
Several points for further study on this subject. First, technically, it's not totally set. There are a lot of uncertainties and various options. I remind you that the first Hyperloop project was the Swiss Metro, which appeared 20 to 30 years ago in Swiss, and it was given up after a lot of studies. The second point is that it would be very costly and certainly expensive for the traveler. So I'm not sure it is the right solution. You can study it, but I can predict that you will not find it very interesting, in my view. I would add something to the competition between modes, is that modes are competing, of course, but there are segments of demand which are more devoted to each mode. And that the length of the line, of the track of Rail Baltica is ideal for rail. 800 kilometers, cities distant from 200 to 500 kilometers. It's the perfect point of rail and high-speed rail. And a competition between modes exists, but in the case I know, not to a total extent. Not to a total extent. If you don't make a rail, the road may satisfy some needs of the rail, but not all the needs.
Thank you. Another popular question, and Nauris, maybe you can comment on the infrastructure side of it, and Tobias, if you could tackle the traffic forecasting side. How will Rail Baltica be integrated with the existing wide gauge railway?
Well, it has, well, how exactly it will be done, I don't know, yes, and we will see, but definitely from the freight forecasts that we have constructed, and also from the analysis of trade flows we have done, there is definitely a potential of intermodal linking of 1435 and 1520. And here we are not talking about let's say Russian oil now coming to Salaspils or Muuga terminal and then being containerized in some form and flowing to Antwerp or elsewhere. But definitely there is lot of generalized cargo that is moving between EU, Russia, Belarus, and other countries. And definitely there is a potential for intermodal terminals actually in Kaunas, Riga, and Muuga that would actually be not only intermodal in terms of combining several modes of transport, but also intergauge. I'm not sure if that's the term used, but interrail terminals, yes. And Tobias, I believe you can comment more on the flows and.
Yeah, fully agree. So our flows have assumed that we have at least 2 or 3 intermodal stations where it is possible to have a gauge switch, like in Salaspils, for example, but as well very important in Lithuania with the connection to the Viking train. We do see a lot of potential in cargos going and coming from Russia, of course, Belarus, but up to Kazakhstan even, and Uzbekistan, minor quantities, of course. But also there we see some certain potential. In the overall context, it's not a lot of volume, but there's a lot of potential to grow these volumes. So mainly for the Baltic countries, it means it's transit cargo. Yeah. In terms of flows, that's it.
All right, thank you. We'll take one more question from Slido and then one from the audience in the interest of time. So let's take the most popular question, 17,000 construction jobs in an industry which is already constrained in terms of availability of labor. How would Rail Baltica tackle this to make sure that the pool of construction workers is available?
This is a discussion for tomorrow. We have the industry supplier day with another 500 different participants, 200 different companies. I think we'll need to be talking to the supply industry, especially to the construction industry, how to do it. Clearly, in this same period, it will not only be the railway that is being built and the terminals that are being built and rebuilt, there will be other construction going on. So we need to think in the Baltic about how to attract enough people who want to work in construction in this area. Because we simply don't have enough people who are willing to do those jobs or even able to do those jobs at that level.
Which is, of course, critically important because these are the jobs that will create the GDP multiplying effects that Nauris also mentioned. So one final question from the audience. There's so many questions on Slido.
Andres Reimer from daily newspaper Postimees Estonia. Hey.
Hello.
Right.
Yeah. Way at the back.
Nice to meet you.
Okay.
How may Russia influence economically and politically success of Rail Baltica? Thank you.
Right. I think that the question was discussed already, but maybe the panelists can tackle it. Leiba?
Well, first of all, clearly we believe that the intersection between the Russian railways and the new railway to be built is of significance, and therefore I hope that we will find more opportunities for freight coming out of Russia. That's number one. God willing, or whatever willing, We will have better connections between St. Petersburg and Tallinn, for example. Those kinds of things could only increase both passenger travel and freight over time for the Rail Baltica project. Politically, I would only invite Russia to support this great European initiative.
All right, let's give a warm hand to our panelists. So, thank you for your perseverance. We will try to make sure that some of the questions we didn't respond during this panel session will be responded after some other Q&A sessions.